been doing this. Good afternoon, members of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Welcome to new members and welcome to members past from previous years. So welcome everybody. The first thing is, Sarah, if you just tell the committee we've received apologies, I think, from two members of it.
And another just last minute as well, actually. So Councillor Douglas Johnson, Councillor Zahira Naz and Councillor Andrea Robinson have all given us apologies, and we don't have substitutes for any present, but we are quorate.
Thank you, Sarah. The first item on the agenda of the first meeting of the year is to appoint the chair, and this year we're also going to appoint a vice chair. So the chair is a statutory requirement. They have to be a member from a registered political party of which the mayor is not a member. So I'm aware of one nomination so far, which is Councillor Tim Huggan. Are there any other nominations for chair? So can somebody second the appointment of Councillor? Yep. Brilliant. Councillor Huggan, do you want to take the chair?
Vice chair.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Yep. So then, like I say, this year we're going to appoint a vice chair. My understanding is that two members have put themselves forward, which is Councillor Douglas Johnson, Councillor Brian Steele. Before I put that to the vote, is there any other members who want to put themselves forward for vice chair? No, in that case, can I do a show of hands then for, we'll start with Douglas Johnson. I'll take that as no votes. And then Councillor Brian Steele. I think that's fairly unanimous. So I'll appoint Councillor Steele as vice chair. So we're going to pause the webcast while people change seats, if that's okay.
Hello, welcome back everybody. I've got agenda item 3 we're moving on to, which is urgent items and announcements. Are there any urgent items or announcements? There are none. Are there any items? We move on to item 4, which is items to be considered in the absence of press and public. I believe there are none for that, so we're swiftly moving on. Moving on to item 5. We're making good progress here. Declaration of interest by any members. Do members have any declarations of interest? Fine, that's perfect. Item number 6, reports and questions by members. No, I don't believe there are any. Right, item 7, we have a question from a member of the public. We have received a question today from a member of the public. They are not in attendance today, and the question will be read out on their behalf by Sarah Pugh.
Thank you. So bear with me, there are a few words in it. So the Simca's interest in the transport ground at Meadowhead Roundabout have not been publicised, and decisions relating to the ownership and transfer of the land are not readily available to the public. Given the substantial and controversial planning application now in progress relating to the site, how has the committee satisfied itself that standards for transparency, governance and scrutiny have been met in the following? The ongoing management and maintenance of the land, its building, green space value and as an asset and amenity under public ownership, the transfer, leasing and subsequent planning process relating to the site and its protection as an asset and amenity under public ownership, and finally the planning and consultation of transport investments, including the A61 corridor, which the Simca presides over, and the impact of increased demand that this proposal would bring.
Thank you very much for this, and this is the response I have. Thank you for taking the time to engage with the MCA and the Scrutiny Committee on this issue. It is certainly a testament to the care and passion you have for your local community. The role of the Scrutiny Committee is to hold the MCA to account and ensure that all aspects of the decision-making process are transparent, inclusive and fair. As such, as a committee, we do not play a role in the initial appraisal or governance of individual MCA schemes. I understand the MCA is the landowner of this site and it is currently leased. There has been no decision made on disposal of this site. Any decision to sell or change an MCA landholding would need to be made by the MCA board, made up of the mayor and leaders of the 4 local authorities. All decisions of the MCA board are taken transparently at meetings held in public, and documentation around any decision is published on our website. MCA board decisions are open to scrutiny by this committee, and it could consider the details of any such decision if it were to be made by the MCA board. I also note your query on specific transport schemes around the Meadowhead site. Part of the MCA's scheme assurance process is that all proposals are assessed in line with guidance from the Treasury and the Department for Transport. This includes technical checks around current and forecast patterns for things like numbers of journeys and passenger numbers. Again, any final decision on such scheme is subject to approval by the MCA board and possibly scrutiny by this committee if it saw fit. I hope this answers your question regarding this committee's role in relation to the management of this site. If you still have concerns, I encourage you to continue to engage with the decisions of the Mayor and the MCA through correspondence or further public questions on issues of concern to you. Thank you very much. Right, moving on to agenda item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of March. Right, are members content that the minutes are an accurate record of this meeting? Look around to see who was here in the 14th of March. Okay, so I'll take that as read, that they are, and I've signed here. Right, okay, we'll go through moving on to item 9, matters arising and review of action log. A number of updates have been made to the action log provided. Do you want to go through them, Sarah?
So the updates are as written. I suppose they were in the pack sent out. It's just if members have particular questions on any of them. Actions which have been closed are moved to the lower half of the item and marked as completed. At the very top are the still open items, and a comment where we've been able to get an update on progress. So it's if there are particular questions we can try to answer now or relay to relevant officers.
Do I have any questions regarding the action log? I'll give you a quick brief moment to go through. Should I go through? Would it be helpful if I go through page by page of this? So if I go through, I'll go through the page that's on the agenda. So we'll start from page 13. Page 14, the Safe Place to Sleep programme. Do we, when we talk about future meeting, is that in the work programme, or are we looking? Have we got a finalised date for that?
Don't have a finalised date. The work programme in your agenda pack does state that this will come back. So you'll come to the work programme, but that's kind of an overview of what you've worked through so far, and there'll be further scoping and timelines for each, and the approach to each of those items. But Safe Place to Sleep is on there.
Thank you for that. Page 14, that's completed. Page 15, have we yes on minute number 131, the local nature recovery strategy. Sorry, Tim, can I just go back to one? Of course you can.
I'm new at this. That South Yorkshire Airport City, they're going to bring the report to a future meeting of the committee. Do we ever put dates when that will be? The future, it could be any time.
Yes, so what we've got again in the committee work plan is when that's, I guess, appropriate and possible following the assurance process for that project. So we've got it noted in the work plan, exec team aware that an update when it's possible to bring to a public meeting will take place, yes.
Please keep on at that, because we've just got to make sure that we do get things appropriately and at the right time and not too late.
And I think that's why it's important that we've got a progress report in terms of, because we don't want things falling off the edge of a cliff.
Yeah.
And if it helps on that, obviously it's a Doncaster-led scheme, and as and when they come to funding, if they apply to the MCA, then that's when it comes into our system. And that's when an MCA decision may be required at some future date for funding. But it's not our scheme as such in terms of
Yeah, although it's not MCA scheme, potentially funding is.
And that's what I say.
the
So at
point's
some
got
point,
to be at the appropriate time. And
Exactly.
when will it be in a position?
that's,
Because we don't want funds
that's a Doncaster
which
issue
could
when
be
they.
used, not be used because they don't, aren't they? So, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I hope we get that before it's approved by the board, that we get some form of oversight beforehand. That would be the right way to do it, so that we're not. It's already been voted by the board. Thank you very much. We're just giving you basically information note back. It's not what we would want to see. Okay.
Capture that in a minute.
Right, so move on. Page 15. It's all about local nature recovery strategy. We've got the list of the NLRS advisory panel members and the bodies they represent to the committee. We had that. Can that be circulated? Is that being circulated to the new committee members? Could we do that?
I'll double check, but we will. Yes.
Right. Item page 16. Community transport. How much further forward are we with community transport on terms of when that's coming to work programme?
So that's noted in your work programme. There are a number of actions you'll see in the log, and there's quite an extensive bit of an update in the log. If there are any questions that we can relay back, then we will. But otherwise, community transport again is noted in that work plan report at the committee's request.
Is community transport a separate strategy than the overall transport strategy?
I think in fact it's a part of the mix for delivery of public transport to users. So it's a mode, that has a specific niche use. So I think it's part of the strategy. How we use community transport to deliver public services, it should be part of the overall transport strategy.
I just think it needs to be integrated.
And I think that's what I think.
Yeah, because I think there's much more potential for community transport for getting people from smaller estates, not just the dial-up service, small estates to transport interchanges.
Councillor, I think we will completely agree, and we're also completely aware of a lot of local authorities have problems around things like home to school transport. So there is a piece of work underway just testing whether we can make best use of the assets that we're all paying for one way or another, to fill in any gaps and reduce any revenue pressures across partner authorities.
Brian?
In community transport, usually run by volunteer groups and things like that, where we struggle to get transporting for so people can get to shopping areas and things like that.
So community transport, we fund part of the community transport operation, and they have a business plan process with the MCA whereby they propose what services they will provide, and it's obviously a negotiation in return for grant funding from the MCA. So we have a level of control or influence over what they provide, and and how we use that as part of the overall transport mix. Particularly as we're looking at other bus delivery models. It's an evolutionary process and changes year for year. But you're right. I mean, voluntary is probably too strong a word, but they're part of the voluntary sector, if you like. They're coordinated by Sheffield Community Transport across the four. So we don't deal with the individual community transport like Doncaster or Rotherham's. We deal with Sheffield Community Transport, who deal with the other three in the other districts. But it is under a sort of service level agreement, grant agreement arrangement. But we're part of their funding mix, so they do more than we fund them for. But we do have that level of influence because of that funding.
So what service level agreements, what's the normal length of those service level agreements? Are they 12 months or 3 years?
So it's an ongoing agreement whereby it's an annual business planning process. So they will come to us and say, this is what we want to deliver this year. And there's, like I say, there's an iterative process around that because it depends how much funding we've got available. And there's then an agreement around that business plan about the services they'll provide for the funding we provide them. That's an annual.
Laura.
Sorry, it's just one of my bugbears, doing things on an annual basis. I know the funding might differ from year to year, but really a business plan or an action plan or strategy should be for a longer term if possible. It provides security, particularly for the voluntary sector. So if there was a 3-year plan, even though the framework could be for 3 years, even though there's an acknowledgement that the funding may vary within those years.
All I would say with community transport, we did have an initial briefing about outline plans. Was it February time? Oh, I'm trying to think when it was. It was towards the end of the committee. So can we have the briefing recirculated round? And also we will need a briefing and an update to that, because one of the things that's clear is that from pre-COVID to post-COVID, numbers had fallen off a cliff. The people using community transport, and they hadn't recovered at all, as far as I could see. And also there were some other auditing that was happening that was still being fleshed out regarding on how some of the community transport firms have been operating. So we need to have updates on that, because I think that's quite serious. We need to look at that. Hannah.
Thanks, Claire. I think the other thing that we need to bear in mind with this is that community transport has been used as a bit of a sticking plaster over recent times. So where private operators have withdrawn bus services, and the combined authority, isn't in a position to exert any influence or take any sort of control over those routes, it's often been the case that community transport has been used to patch over those cracks, which is fine. It solves the problem, but it's it's perhaps not really the best use of those services. But also, as the bus franchising plan hopefully moves forward, there will need to be a look at, I guess, how community transport is repurposed, because if we move to a place where we do have control over our bus routes, we won't need to use community transport to paper over those cracks anymore.
Without going into too much detail, some of the pre-COVID and post-COVID, some of the community transport and the options and how you book your community transport, etc., was seen to be less fit for purpose, because basically involves people ringing up a week before for a lot of the services, etc., and a lot of people don't necessarily do that these days. There's no app, you can't do it online, you can do it online, that sort of thing. And these are the sort of things that committee members had expressed that they wanted to see some progress made on that, so people could potentially book with less of a 7-day time limit, because people aren't necessarily, when they're booking, and also being able to do it in other ways other than getting somebody picking up the phone to do it in other manners, the ways that they could actually book. So these are the sort of things we'd like to see some progress from, and it's what the committee members had expressed an opinion on before, but obviously we need to have some more updates on that and what progress is on that, because it's something we need South Yorkshire to get right across the whole area, because community transport is a vital service for many.
I think partly comes back to the initial comment, which is should be part of the overall strategy, and what's its niche. It's a form of demand responsive transport in many ways. So that overall strategy, particularly as we move to potentially different delivery models, needs to be re-examined as part of the whole to make sure we're getting the best value for that spend.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to page...
Sorry, I did press my button. Is that the way? No, it was just that I think the important thing about the community transport discussion is that somebody does a consultation on how the users perceive it and what the issues are. I can say things anecdotally, but I don't use it. So I just think there really should be a consultation across the combined authority about how people experience using it.
And I don't know whether it will, but that if there was a proposal to go out to consultation on bus franchising, there will be a wide consultation on delivery of bus services. So it could potentially form part of that as a mix because you've got to look at what services are exempted from the franchising scheme and stuff like that. So that I can see a potential there for that.
Should we move on to end of page 17, page 18, which is tram mobilisation. I know some of the backward-looking stuff's been looked at by the audit committee here. Was it last week, I think? And then page 18, Mayoral Scrutiny, obviously, and I think that's it. Page 19. Move on to the review of latest forward plan of key decisions. Forward plan of key decisions at the time of publishing is attached in the pack. Anybody got any questions about it, or should I go through page by page just quickly? So we go through, start on. Of course, it got the number. Yeah, page 23. So I can see it there. Page 23. Any questions on that? Page 24, which is Prosperity Fund applications. Page 25. Now, we move on to agenda item 11, MCA Investments Insurance Framework. I have the pleasure of inviting Gareth Sutton, who's the Executive Director of Resources and Investment, to give us a brief overview, and then we'll have a chance to question you afterwards. Go ahead, Gareth.
Hi guys, thank you so much for inviting me today. As the chair said, I'm the Executive Director of Resources and Investment, so I'm responsible for the authority's programmes of activity. I'm the Chief Finance Officer today. I'm joined on screen by my Director of Programme Delivery, Laurie Thomas, who would have liked to be here, but unfortunately she has COVID, so we thought it would be best if she joined remotely. Laurie's the subject matter expert and will be able to talk about this more authoritatively than I can do. I thought it may be helpful, just before we get into the substantive bit of discussion, if I could just share a business case example with you, because it might be helpful just to talk to individual bits that I can point to in the business case.
You need one.
Yeah, if I could keep one, thank you. So the business case that Sarah is passing around to you is what we call a business justification case, and so it's a simplified business case, and we use that for schemes under £1 million. The scheme in question is related to a Rotherham company called Grimm & Co. And we've chosen to put this scheme in front of you because it was singled out by the government assessors for our gain share programme at the Gateway Review as a good example of a scheme that was delivering social value. So it's kind of pertinent to what we'll talk about. So I'm aware that we've distributed a slide pack to you, but I think the committee's preference is not to walk through the pack individually. So I'll just raise a few points with you. So there are two really important variables when we look at individual business cases, and we get lots of these that arrive with us. Requests for financial support for individual projects that we then have to consider. Two big variables. The first is the MCA's policy environment. So it's what would we like to do? What are our overall aspirations and objectives? And right now that is set down through our SEP. That's the Strategic Economic Plan, and that sets out our objectives. And they are largely clustered around three areas, and that's stronger, greener, fairer. And there are lots of individual things that sit within that, but we tend to test schemes based on those broader objectives. The second point is around government funding conditionality and the rules. So it's really important to remember that as an organisation in receipt of devolution, whether that be devolved powers or devolved funding, government require that we act in a certain way. So government insists that we have what we call an assurance framework, and that is simply the way that we assure ourselves that we make sound investment decisions. And the second point is that they require us, as part of that assurance framework, to test business cases in line with what government called the Green Book. Now, the Green Book is just a big manual about how to prepare business cases and how to test what is in those business cases ahead of an investment decision. So our assurance framework is approved annually each year, and the slide pack takes you through the assurance framework and the processes. The assurance framework sets out things like roles and responsibilities, how business cases will be prepared, how our governance works, and how we appraise individual schemes. And every individual project that we invest into that involves devolved funding, whether that be things like the gain share funding, which is our long-term devolution settlement, £30 million over 30 years, or whether it be things like our City Region Sustainable Transport Programme, which is the big transport funding that we have, it all goes through this process. And social value is written into that business case process. So we go through what we call the 5 cases in each business case. That's the financial case, the commercial case, the strategic case, the management case, and then we test social value as we progress through those schemes. Now, where possible, we seek to apply monetary value to social value, and that's because government requires to do that, and that allows us to appraise individual schemes on a consistent manner, such that you should be able to put 2 schemes side by side and see which returns the greatest benefit. Clearly, a lot of schemes can or will deliver social value, but it can't be monetised. And where that's the case, we try and apply a qualitative score. So the case that you've got in front of you with Grimm & Co, it's a scheme under £1 million. If you look through the strategic case, we talk about social value. That comes out on page 9, where we talk about contributions to cleaner, greener and fairer, and we look at things like productivity, business density, and so on and so forth. We test it through the economic case, and again, that's where we try and apply monetary value to the social benefits. In this case, we couldn't do it. So rather than just saying no to schemes, we try and apply a qualitative assessment. So if you look at page 12 of this scheme, this is where we're applying a score to the non-monetary benefits associated with this project. So we're trying to appraise the social value returns. We've got qualitative wording around social value in...
Excuse me, I've got page 12 missing.
I've got page 9 missing.
Oh, great.
Printer's got one.
12.
You got one.
Oh,
I've got page 26.
oh, so it's the right-hand side of
Right-hand
page
side,
2 pages on.
Yeah, sorry, this is my pernicious finance director nature. I do double-sided printing, trying to save us some money.
But then we have to buy everybody a pair of glasses, so it's,
okay, we're all on track. So the economic case, pages 11 and 12, this is where you can see that ordinarily we try and test the financial benefits of social value. In this case, we couldn't, so we gave a qualitative assessment. We set that out in narrative on page 13, and this is a great scheme. So it contributed lots, and the independent assessors on behalf of government as part of the Gain Share Gateway review were really keen on this scheme, and I've put it forward actually as an example of where we can invest in schemes that deliver something more than simply financial benefit to the economy. So this scheme has drawn out the enhancing the image and reputation of Rotherham and the wider area, helping to create additional sources of community pride and cohesion, and this sits alongside things like Rotherham's Children's Capital Culture programme that they have, contribution to the alleviation of social problems such as deprivation, crime, antisocial behaviours. So all this stuff really matters to us, and we know that somewhere down the line it does have a financial impact. Often it's incredibly difficult to quantify. And then simply helping to enhance quality of life in local communities, particularly for young people and families. And we know that really matters in Rotherham, given some of the issues that have played out over the last few years in that area. So the latter part of the business case will then test things like the commercial dimension. So the commercial dimension is how you might procure goods or services to deliver a project. And it's in this that we often see some of the more common areas that we can attract social value. And it's things like apprenticeships and how you can work with suppliers to get them to contribute to wider social impact in areas. So we are always really keen on testing this in this area. So there's good examples of what's happening in that space. But if you often walk around in construction sites across your area, if there's placards out the front, they'll often talk about the number of apprentices that they take on as part of an individual project, and what they may be contributing to wider net zero objectives. So you often get constructors that will plant trees or invest in the natural environment around a construction site. So again, this is where we're trying to extract social value, and that's done on behalf of the individual local authorities who are delivering the schemes. And then I guess the final point is that a big part of our assurance framework is the monitoring and evaluation. So our role does not stop at the point that we give someone some money. We then flip into monitoring how our project is being delivered, whether the outputs and the outcomes that we've contracted for are being delivered. And then at the back end, we conduct evaluation. And the evaluation is all about trying to learn about whether a scheme has succeeded or not, and what we might do into the future. So we're just going through that evaluation right now with government as part of the Gateshead Gateway review process, and we're just about to conclude our local growth fund evaluation as well. And that's really important, it's making sure that into the future we learn the lessons of the past and how we have invested our money. So that's whistle stop tour. I hope that helps, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Yeah, it's based around social return on investment. We did in Barnsley on some of our area council schemes, went through the social return on investment and organised through a company called Rocket Science, and it was academically accepted by government at that time about social return being an important factor. And we as in South area anyway at that time, we had training and development opportunities through rocket science to bring that added value we couldn't measure monetary gain. And some of our best results came through when we were doing welfare benefits and debt advice projects, which we were measuring people's feel and thoughts around how it improved their life chances in terms of no monetary gain. So it's something that we were certainly interested in, because potentially you could also put a social value on your projects before the start, and that would then quantify even better. But when it was government accepted and academically accepted, that gave it the credence to expand further, and I welcome it, because we clearly need to evidence social value, because why are we doing things if we're not doing it to improve our society? Do you agree? That one be question.
I think it's empty. I think there's an acceptance within government that there's been an over-reliance on monetisable benefit in investment, and that just lends, engenders you to go down a certain route. And then it's really interesting that HM Treasury are now talking about more unquantifiable things in terms of investment appraisal. I had a fascinating chat with a senior Treasury official about the importance of actually measuring happiness, which is, the ultimate, the ultimate endpoint that we're all, I guess, seeking in personal, lives generally. But that is a really fundamental shift from government. Yeah. How you ever measure that properly, I think, is a really interesting point as well. But I do think that there is a recognition now that simply seeking monetary returns for society doesn't add up to all the sum of its parts, and actually we may miss some really important schemes that would deliver wider benefit to the community.
Laura?
I'm really quite excited at seeing this, because I used to be on the Yorkshire Forward board many years ago, and there was nothing like this to look at schemes there. We weren't seeing any social return on investment. We were just giving money to the private sector and walking away. And I don't see why, as a public authority using public money, we should ever do that. We should always be looking at social return on investment. Otherwise, why would we be here?
Can I ask one of the things is, what's your capacity for doing this? Because, I mean, have you got enough capacity to go through this framework and then actually, because one of the things I have heard from speaking to colleagues is there are quite a few bottlenecks in how slow it is, because it's one thing having all this put down here and how we do it, but it's how long we do it and what the capacity is and how quickly the funds get released to the to who has applied for them, so that they can start doing,
And I think that's a fair challenge. So I've been with the MCA 4 years now. About 3 years ago, I undertook an assessment that was suggesting that it was taking at least 2 years to go from the inception of an idea through business case processes, and that was a fundamental acceptance that was too long, and that was causing all sorts of issues. Not least with our funding partners, but also we simply weren't delivering at the right pace for the region, and that means that we're not aggregating the benefits that the investment is there to deliver. What we've done in the last few years is been pretty systematically go through our entire investment approach and turn it on its head and start again. And one of the things that we've done is change the assurance framework. So there was an awful lot of bureaucracy in terms of touch points for decision makers through the assurance framework. So as part of the governance review that I think Scrutiny may have seen over the last year, we streamlined the approach to governance and investment. So we only have one touch point now with the MCA board, where they make a decision, and then the rest is delivered through officer boards. We also stood up Laurie Thomas's team, which is what we call our programme management office, and that programme management office was there to ensure that we got schemes through our processes right first time. The previous process that we had it felt very divorced from the people who were preparing projects, and it was almost like we'd set up processes to catch people out. So they would submit a scheme into our process, and then we'd say, no, that's not good enough, go away. Now, we do need to ensure that we only invest in the right schemes, but the PMO's role is to work with scheme developers to make sure that when it does land with us, it's good to go. So we are co-developing schemes now with partners, and that is really sped up process. And if you were to look at our capital outturn report, we just hit our highest levels of capital investment ever. We've got more schemes going through our processes than we have before, and it's really some simple fundamental changes that we've made, but just reorienting how the MCA works with partners and other areas to make sure that we get the right schemes through at the right pace. To your question of whether we've got the right number of people, the PMO required investment, so we've got more people in the business, but I think I'd always say the more people we have, the better schemes we can get to deliver, because we will drag out social value and things like this. So it's quite often that we'll get schemes that come through, and it might be a transport scheme as an example, and they'll be prepared by a transport project manager whose interest is in active travel cycle lanes or buses or other things, and they don't often think about the social value element, but the programme management office is there to help them drag that out, because it's easily missed if you don't get it right first time. So their role is to help develop and get the best value for money out of those schemes.
Are you saying that first of all that there's a sort of almost a pre-application period where you're somebody inquired about a project that may potentially be viable, and then you give guidance from that point and say this is what we'd like to see from the scheme, and these are the things that we'll be looking for, and then once the application is made, what is your ambition from that to actually approval of a scheme? Have you got a sort of a date timeline, sort of 9 months, 12 months, that sort of thing, or is it less than that?
Yeah, it's a good question. We've thought about whether it's worth almost putting SLAs together about the speed at which we do some of these things, but we've found that schemes are so idiosyncratic that it's not always worth the time trying to do this. Our commitment is working with partners, getting through as fast as possible, but with the right level of checks and balances on the way through. The business case process normally goes strategic case, outline business case, and full business case. So that sort of staged iteration of how you prepare a business case allows us to work with partners to make sure that by the time it gets to full business case, we're maximising all the benefits. So often what will happen is a strategic business case will come through. That's where we test whether we like the idea of the scheme and, generally, whether we think it's a good fit with the sort of principles of stronger, greener, fairer, or the things that are in the economic plan. But we iterate at that point. So by the time it gets to outline business case, we will have worked with partners to make sure that they're adding in things. And if they've missed anything around social value, we'll work with them to try and exploit the possibilities. And then by the time it gets to FBC, it should be good to go. So the more people we have, the more resource, the more that we can work with partners to get it right. But I think the challenge that you put down about pace was fair. I think just watch the speed at which we're getting stuff through. I think we've made a marked shift in that.
Pass on to Brian.
So, is there any schemes you've failed completely because they've not listened to you? Because it sounds like you're talking through the process to get through the scheme.
Yeah, there's been schemes normally don't get past the first hurdle if we don't think they're appropriate, but we have had schemes that over the last couple of years in particular that we've been working through. There might have been good schemes, but they've fallen foul of the inflationary challenges that you probably all see on across the business. So some schemes fail because they're no longer affordable. Some schemes fail because they've got technical challenges about what they were trying to achieve. Often schemes that involve like heavy road use and things like that I sometimes find more difficult to get away. But we've also found that some schemes fail just simply because they have procurement problems and the inability to get the market to respond to projects in good time. But we do filter out bad schemes by the time that they get to board for decision. That I guess that's our purpose. And if we do it right, we work with partners for them to voluntarily withdraw rather than saying no fundamentally at that point.
Does this mean to say that with some of the schemes that you have, that basically, so say there's a lack of funding or the funding's not right now, rather than outright rejection, you say come back next year? Is there that possibility? They don't have to go through the whole process again, but there's a potential that they can come back with a revised scheme if it's, the inflationary pressures, etc., to say there's no money this year for that, but there is potential for next year. But the bid you put in is basically sound, but it will probably need a bit of revising. Yeah,
exactly that. So if we've done a lot of work on a scheme already, we won't ask them to start the process all over again. So they could return at a point into the future. And I guess the aspiration for us is actually to have a stock of projects worked up, ready to go, so that rather than being reactive to funding opportunities, we're in a position to go to government or to the private sector and say, these are all the schemes that we've got that can deliver. All we need is some funding. And I think one of the problems that this region has had in recent years is that government have come along with funded programmes, and we've almost had to start from scratch in terms of developing schemes at that point and getting them into delivery. And you normally only have 5 years as part of a programme. So when you think about the length of construction periods and so on, that's not an awful lot of time. So we've been putting quite a lot of money into the system at the moment through what we call the Project Feasibility Fund, and this is revenue funding to develop projects at risk, so that we've got really good schemes. And rather than waiting for government to come to us, we can go to government and say, here's how you grow an economy in South Yorkshire. We've just not got the money to do it, and that's paid dividend in the last few years. So last Christmas, government released some money. Completely unexpectedly, and we had a number of schemes ready to go, and we were able to say, here's what we've got. They're at a good stage of development. If you give us the money, we'll get them delivered. And government rewarded us with about £18 million, I think, to deliver a number of schemes across the region. So it's a great example that if you've got stuff on the stocks, you're probably going to invest at the right pace, but also there'll be better worked up schemes, because you've done them in your own time rather than rushing them to meet a funding deadline. So that's where we'd like to get to, that we've got a bottom drawer of stuff ready to go all the time.
Thank you very much, Gareth. I can't see any more questions. Has anybody else got a question they'd wish to ask? Thank you very much for your time on this. Moving on to... Sorry. Moving on to item 12. Here it goes. We have obviously the big event since our last meeting was obviously Sheffield local, no, the general election. And we have emerging MCA priorities as a result of the general election, obviously, and we've got here to give us a short presentation, Andy Gates, welcome, who's Director of Development, Collaboration and Culture. Hand over to you, Andy.
Brilliant, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I am reliably informed that you don't want people to just walk through slides that you've all had and read, so I'm not going to do that. So what I'll try and do is just tee it up, and the slides are kind of instantly out of date anyway, if I'm perfectly honest with you. So it's a pretty quick moving world at the moment in terms of the new government and how they are starting to engage with mayoral combined authorities. Just since the election, so formally all the UK mayors were invited to number 10, met with the Cabinet and the PM, and that was on, I think, on the Tuesday after the election on the Thursday. We've had, and that was a deliberate public intention, I think, on behalf of the government, to set out that they want to work with mayors and see mayors as part of the quote-unquote sort of constitutional settlement of England, and that they expect to see mayors as mayors and MCAs as a bit of a delivery partner for the things that the government are trying to do, and that they are sort of locked in more formally to how the government does its work. So they are talking, for example, about establishing a council of nations and regions of which mayors will be part of. So in the absence of a sort of constitutional framework in the UK, that's a kind of probably as far as you go in terms of locking in regional bodies into the body politic. So I think that's really helpful for us, because one of the challenges that MCAs of any political, led by any particular politician, have found is that the way you engage with government as a mayor is really difficult. It's, if I'm honest, sometimes linked to personal patronage, personal and individual relationships, if you're in the right part of the country, in the right part of the place, and that's no real way, we would argue, and I've argued, and the mayor has argued, to sort of run government. So we want to be on a more some consistent, clear footing, proper relationships with Whitehall in terms of officials, but also with government departments in terms of the politics. So that is, we're seeing that coming through now. So the new Secretary of State for the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government, so back to MHCLG, that's the old Department of Levelling Up. That's back to what it was called. Similar mission, if we're honest. So Secretary of State Angela Rayner has written to all mayors, basically taking the manifesto that Labour published and said, we are going to deliver this, so that they are a matter of public record. And what we've seen that play through is into the King's speech, where there were two key ones for us, which was the English devolution bill, which is where they are effectively committing to lock in legislation the commitments they've set out in their manifesto to work formally with mayors, to deepen the devolution settlement to mayors and to widen the settlement to mayors. So deepening is giving us more powers over the things we've already got. Skills would be a classic example. At the moment, we're responsible for the vocational education budget if you're 19 years and above, but that really is sometimes only fixing the problems caused by the system 14 to 19 and indeed earlier. So there'll be a deepening of things like skills, but also we'd expect a broadening of the functions and powers and responsibility that mayors have. For example, moving into things like having a statutory health improvement duty. There will be things in there about planning, which we don't know yet what that will look like. And that may actually come in the housing and regeneration bill coming forward. but they have committed to exploring new powers for MCAs in terms of planning, particularly around getting housing growth going quicker. That's always the national diagnosis, that the problem is in planning rather than in other things. But we will explore and see what that looks like. So it's pretty broad. The things that it's probably just worth me flagging with the committee now are that there is a very clear expectation that South Yorkshire will have to produce a growth plan. We've all produced growth plans and strategies and documents in the past. This growth plan will be the it will become a statutory document in time. The English Devolution Bill will make them statutory documents, but they're not going to have done that by the time of the next spending review. So the intention that the government have made fairly clear to us is that a quick growth plan will inform the National Industrial Strategy, which will inform the next spending review. So that creates pressure and pace, because spending reviews are hard to do with a good long run-up, and even harder to do with a concertinaed run-up. If we're looking out in October, November for a spending review, the work started now. We do not know yet whether that is a one-year spending review or a long 3-4 year settlement. It is really hard for the government to work out this, to be perfectly honest. Do they just roll over for a year and see how the land is lying, see how the economy is looking? And there are lots of things that we all care about, like Shared Prosperity Fund, that's delivering great stuff in all of our communities. There's a cliff edge on Shared Prosperity Fund of March next year. Are the government in a position to take a decision about what that looks like over the next 4 years, or do they just roll it over? So there's some interesting things at play, and that does make it a challenge for us in terms of working out what our growth plan looks like, how detailed is it, how much of it is a strategy versus particular projects and projects. But it is going to include housing growth. We're clearly going to play into the national government's commitment around their 1.5 million target over the course of a parliament. And the other bit, probably, I think it was in the slides, is the other bit that takes MCAs into a different space is the reform agenda, so public service reform. There is a very clear indication that they are going to expect Mayoral combined authorities to start playing in that public service reform space. So how do we play a systems leadership role in bringing together different parts of whether it's health, transport, infrastructure, regen skills, worklessness, to kind of tackle some of those big problems. Now that's really interesting, South Yorkshire, so many of you will be familiar with the Pathways to Work launch in Barnsley on Tuesday. Hugely significant national coverage, which is brilliant, and the ambition in there is to do something in Barnsley that then we can sort of replicate some of that activity at South Yorkshire, but really the ambition there is for that to be a national exemplar as to how you join up stuff differently. That's probably the most tangible example of what we really mean by public service reform, taking all the bits of the system and making them work better. And that is an area that Mayoral combined authorities have dabbled in. Greater Manchester's probably been the most advanced with its work on health reform. But the government have made a very clear signal that they expect growth and reform to sit together. And that is probably music to many ears, in that you cannot grow an economy without fixing a third of our productivity challenge, which is ill health and economic inactivity. So that's how it all stitches together. It's really early days, but the mood music has been that the things that the Labour Party said in their manifesto they would like to do, working more with mayors, doing more, using them as a delivery partner for some of their ambitions. At the moment, that's sort of I'd say being reflected in the way that they're behaving with us, but the big challenges will be the development of the growth plan and how much the government are willing to support some of the pretty ambitious things that we would probably want to see in ours, how that public service reform work plays out, what are the powers that we think in the MCA and across the South Yorkshire we need to do some of those things that we don't currently have, and working all of that out quite quickly to meet a King's Speech legislative sort of timetable, which is really ambitious. And I know there's a lot to say. I hope that reflects broadly the slides, but it's that's the position we're at the moment. Happy to take questions or challenge.
Hannah?
Thanks. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, if that's okay. Do you think we're going to see an end to the sort of bidding wars and horse trading sort of a process? Because that's been what's characterised. You know, we've seen different combined mayoral authority regions, you know, doing really quite well. You know, not necessarily aligned with politics. Greater Manchester's the best example of that. Labour Mayor got immense amounts of power and funding. So do we think we're going to see an end to that? Is my first question. And my second one is completely separate. You talk about a potential role for the MCA in terms of planning reform. Where do you think that's likely to sit? So obviously at the moment, the individual local authorities are the planning authorities, and if they make a decision that, you know, the applicant isn't happy with, that gets referred, you know, down to the planning inspectorate and the Secretary of State. So are we anticipating MCAs taking over the role of constituent local authorities as the planning authority, or taking over the role of the planning inspectorate in terms of, you know, picking up those appeals and objections? And is there likely to be any change that makes it more than just, you know, a sort of appeal review process?
There's excellent questions. I'll answer the easy ones first. So in terms of the end of the bidding round, the previous government committed to single settlements, which is a single line in the national budget spending review with Treasury, which was designed to end, first of all, department. So as you all know, and Gareth knows only too well, our funding comes down line by line by line. Some of that's not bidding now, but some of that's still having to submit a list of schemes that we're going to do, and then we get a little bit to play around the edges, and then some of it is pure classic bidding. The commitment, and whether it's called a single settlement or an integrated settlement, there is a commitment to enact that. So we will have at some point a single line at the same time as a spending review process, which is brilliant. Which is what we've always asked for. I suspect there will always be bidding rounds for some stuff. And the debate, though, will move into what do we not have to do competitive bidding rounds for. And we will all argue, as mayoralties, I guess, across the country, that that's a pretty broad set. But there will always be government wheezers, government plans, new pots that I think will end up in bidding rounds. So I think, but that's really helpful. And the important thing, of course, of the single settlement is not just that you get a kind of chunk of money that was old DFT money and old DLUC money or MHCLG. It's genuinely hugely, we don't have to submit a programme of things we're going to spend it on. What we would do is say we are currently, our outcomes say we are, I don't know, our transport poverty levels are X. Over the next 5 years, we're going to invest to make our transport poverty levels a little bit better than X. And that would be the debate we have with the department, with the Treasury, and then the quantum of funding determines how ambitious that target is. So that's how it's currently being drawn up. The second question about planning, I don't know, but I'd be very surprised if it's taking any planning powers away from a local authority. I actually suspect it's not taking planning inspectorate. I think the game really, and there's nothing publicly produced by the government on this, it's around having a spatial plan that has some teeth. So where are our housing sites matching to our major transport infrastructure sites, to our, where's our employment land, where's all that fitting, and how are we looking at that at South Yorkshire level, where our travel to work patterns are across the patch, housing needs different, and so I think that is slightly easier territory, and we don't have a spatial plan. Some places, so Greater Manchester, there is a statutory spatial plan, and only 9 of the 10 local authorities have signed it off. So it becomes hard very quickly. So I think it's in that space really, rather than the inspectorate or taking planning powers up. But there may be particular powers, like, I don't know, CPO as an example, that may be beneficial. But we have some of that. Steve will know in our legal framework, we have the ability to do some of that on certain sites anyway. We're going to be, I think, I can't speak on behalf of the politicians, but I know our leaders in Mayoral will be scrutinising anything that comes through in that legislation. Of course, it'll be primary legislation, so just worth reminding committee members that the way devolution deals have been done to date have been very much the government offer us something, we consult, get the consent from each of our local authorities to do it, and it or not. Primary legislation takes all that away, so it is done to you, and then you have that power. And I'm getting into Steve, our monitoring officer's territory here, but effectively that power is given to you, and then it's about exercising it rather than consenting to the use of it. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, most of our deals so far have been done by orders under the governing legislation, and it's a patchwork across the country of what powers you've got, what functions you've got. Primary legislation could give us functions or obligations, and you know, it's a bit like nature's recovery strategies. You know, they were placed on us as a requirement. We didn't have a choice about doing that. Central government just said you are going to be responsible for those in a separate piece of legislation. So that's, you know, it's the difference between what we've asked for and we get through these specific orders that we've all got our own we've got our South Yorkshire orders, Manchester theirs, or they say from the centre, you're all doing this. So
That doesn't sound quite as much like devolution, does it, in some ways?
Maybe what they'll do is say you have the function to exercise if you want, as opposed to it's an obligation. If you see
Rather than
the power rather than the duty.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That sounds reasonable. I suppose I think you're probably right in terms of there will be some stuff that still has to be bid for, but I guess we'd like it to be, you know, the icing rather than sort of the cake itself. And just a quick one on that, Steve. So like the nature recovery strategy stuff, when they say you must do this, does that come with the appropriate levels of cash, or is it you must do this but we're not giving you any cash to do it?
Gareth may be better to answer that. I think in that case, I don't think it did. I think we might have got a small grant from government to...
So, bone of contention generally, but they gave us a relatively small sum of money to prepare. What exists is a duty called new burdens. So the principle is that if government requires you to deliver something on government's behalf, the funding should flow with it. Now, I think the challenge is in making sure that the right level of funding comes with this, but the local nature recovery strategy duty has not yet arrived with us, so I think we'll have to wait and see on that one.
On with it.
Okay, right. Well, we'll keep our fingers crossed on that one then, I suppose. Thank you very much.
I just want to, with the spatial strategy and obviously nature recovery strategy, the potential spatial strategy for South Yorkshire, because I'm old enough to remember and had been involved with the government officers for the regions and their spatial strategies, which never really came to fruition because there's an enormous amount of money and time needed to have a spatial strategy. And I just remember in East England the amount of arguments between the individual local authorities about coming out with these spatial strategies that were never fully implemented. But it was also an enormous body of work and so where planning would fit, because we all know with our individual authorities within South Yorkshire how much the planning departments spend on their local plans and take time on the local plans and the amount of resource that needs, and it just worries that Simca is given that some sort of role in that without any commensurate resources or the expertise, because I do know there's a shortage of planning officers with that sort of expertise in the country. So how would you foresee that going forward? Because basically we may be in a position where we're working with other mayoral authorities to say, look, you know, how are we going to hope to have the expertise to do this and do it well, which is what we want to do.
Yeah, I suppose if you've got an 18-year-old at home and they're wondering what they should go and study at university, it's probably like you know, biodiversity and net gain mapping and planning. But you know, that's a special breed of local government officer who wants to do that. And I don't think any of them are sat around this table. So there's one of the best things we've done with our investment zone, cash, is commit to beefing up planning capacity in the local authorities, like, because we know it is a barrier to just speed of getting stuff through. So we're absolutely cognizant of that. Like, just getting delivery requires that capacity. So some of our investment zone monies are going towards beefing up capacity, not at the Simca level, though within each individual place. It gets to the broader point about how our MCA is resourced to do the job they're doing, and I think in the Mayor's letter to the Prime Minister early doors, it was very clear that if you want us to be a genuine partner in delivering your mission, you're going to have to resource not just the MCA but local government. And being honest, every single meeting I've been on with other UK mayors, officials and the politicians, they've all been making that case into Whitehall. So whether that is heeded or not, I don't know, but I don't think we are in a position to do a lot. You're absolutely right, the planning capability, just affording it, let alone whether the people are out there to do it, are two different things. Right now, we're not in that position to do it.
Just first, and then.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just looking at the early engagement with the new government and the letter to the Prime Minister from the Mayor. I just wondered, will we see a response to that, or have we already seen a response to that? And when we get that response, can we see it?
I see no reason why not. We haven't had a response yet, but we have had, and I don't know if they're in the public domain, letters from the Secretary of State. I mean, if we can take it away as an action, I don't think, speaking candidly, there was nothing in the letter from the Secretary of State for MHCLG that was not anything we wouldn't share. I suspect we'll get a nice response from the PM at some point, but sometimes government is done by correspondence, but actually I think it's the kind of things like the English Devolution Bill and the engagement we have on that, the engagement we have on the design of our growth plan and how the National Industrial Strategy plays to that are probably more tangible points as to whether the government generally committing to work with us or not. But if we, any of that correspondence, I'm sure we could share with this committee. And if we can't, it'd be someone telling me we can't.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. If I could just loop back to where we were before Josh's excellent question there. In terms of the potential role of the MCA in that planning, obviously, yes, local authorities have their individual local plans, and that's been very much focused around housing targets and local authorities needing to build so many houses, which obviously hasn't solved the housing crisis because the housing crisis is ongoing. And the thing that I personally felt was lacking from Barnsley's local plan, which I was vocal about at the time back in 2019, is that underlying infrastructure. So you can build as many houses as you like, but if you don't build that underlying infrastructure of transport, roads, rail, buses, everything else, of health services, of education, of access to skills, then you're not tackling anything. You're just building houses. You're not building homes. You're not building communities. And that for me is where the planning system and all of the talk around build more houses falls down. So it seems to me, from what Tim commented on there, that is the role of the combined mayoral authority if it gets to a position where it has more influence and more abilities to deliver those sort of infrastructure services. If you're building a new housing estate or whatever, how are you going to make sure it's got buses? Well, it's the MCA, hopefully, that's going to have the power to sort that out. How are you going to make sure that those kids can get to further education opportunities? It's going to be the MCA that sorts that out. So, I do hope that our council leaders manage not to squabble with each other over that. That does seem to be better, actually, I think, than it perhaps has been in the past. Because the thing I always say is people don't live their lives, within those lines on maps. and you might be buying a brand new house that's been built in Barnsley, but you might, to all intents and purposes, live in Rotherham and be wanting to access all of the services there. So, I mean, obviously, I don't run the department, but it sounds like there's a clear gap there that the MCA can potentially fill in terms of reducing those public objections and therefore reducing the local authorities' anxieties around some of this housing development.
Laura.
Briefly, because I think I'm running on. Exactly that. Let's learn the lessons from Waverley. Absolute shortage of infrastructure there. And I'm with substitution on a planning committee in Sheffield. We had the Cannon Brewery site, but because of the size, they don't have to invest to pay anything towards health, school, or recreation facilities. But when you add them up cumulatively, then it's a huge number of numbers of new housing, and we're not getting that infrastructure, and somebody needs to oversee that.
Just on that exact point, what we should be looking at is not just new development, but it's new town. Because we are, you mentioned Waverley. You can drive through Waverley and all you see is house.
Yeah.
But if you looked at Waverley as a town, it brings in infrastructure as well as. But on smaller developments, what we ain't got is the opportunity as local authorities to make sure that there is links. I know there's a big development near where I live, but not where I represent, where the link to the Durham Valley Parkway is atrocious, and it's going to leave rat runs. And so instead of just looking at the development as a development and a route, it needs to be mapped out, or it's going to impact on other people who live in that community. But with Anna's point, there are some projects that have been developed. For example, Doncaster is going to benefit Barnsley with Link Road, A1M1 Link Road. So that is cross-border, which is going to be development, and we're not having people arguing over where borders are, because that's an investment from Doncaster that's going to support Barnsley's development as much as Doncaster's. So I welcome that.
Transport and roads were always a South Yorkshire based thing in the early days when it were old South Yorkshire County Council. The highways and the departments like that were there. It was the smaller infrastructures like schools what belong to the local authorities and things like that. So you've got to go to a strategy like that. If you've not got a strategy, Mick, to link up and what thing, and it don't just link to the roads, does it? It's about trying to get cars off road, making sure that people use public services better, transport services better, trains are linked up, super tram should be going all over that. What's happening now, the tram train, what went to Rotherham, it should be going farther. It could go farther because it's now, but it was built on, well, it was built to go into Rotherham, it could be built to go into Barnsley from where it is, it could be. There's links for getting it all over.
Smiling, Brian, I used to be a community development worker in Maltby, and they certainly didn't want to do Maltby going that far, I can assure you. But that's a different discussion, isn't it?
We should be talking about building communities. Yeah, we're not building estates, we're building communities.
I think the problem when we get with trying to build communities these days, and this is the difficult bit, people don't live in communities no more. In some areas they live in houses, they live on internet, they live on certain things like that. They don't change. Communities don't develop. Communities are not like where I were when I was young, when they were a community. When I was young and people lived in communities and you actually knew everybody in your community, you knew everybody on your street and you looked after people on the street. After when there were old mining communities and things like that, people knew everybody when everybody lived in the same area and worked in the same area. But because people work away and work in different areas and transform for, people do not have community spirit like they used to. I don't think it's there as what it used to be. You might be shaking your head at me, but I've lived a long time and I've seen our communities change. And I used to come from Barnsley and I used to come from where they used to call it Honest Doddiff. So I do know areas and things like that. But so communities are not the same as what they used to be. They're not, and I think you've got to live is how you get that communities back and people building in communities, because people don't interact in the same way. As my stepdaughter and that and their families don't interact like we interact with people.
Last question, Hannah.
Just to say to Brian, I think there's a big difference, Brian, between things aren't the same as they were when I was a kid and that thing doesn't exist anymore. Just because the way that people, you know, interact with their communities and their neighbours and their services has changed doesn't mean it doesn't exist anymore.
Thank you, Andy. I think you've got a strong tip from the committee about regarding strategic planning, and we'll need a lot of intensive thought from government, because that will be the thorniest, most difficult problem for the government to grapple. Otherwise, we will see that what's happened over the last 20, 30 years in terms of planning and development and strategic planning particularly has been a real issue in terms of how development of communities and infrastructure and that sort of thing. So we'd like some reports back on developing things that have been, how developments and emerging thoughts of the Labour government, where it's intends to go, because there's lots more to question on. It's particularly some of the statutory stuff and what they're going to put on a formal basis with mayors, etc., which is going to be interesting to see if that develops, because at the moment all the mayors are Labour except for one. Well, once there's a government, then generally, you know, as we, you know, you see in other places around the world, particularly, you know, when you look at Australia, usually once there's a government of one party, then all the estates flip to the other party, and as a consequence of that, how much a taste for a statutory level of engagement is there, we'll see. Anyway, thank you for your time. We'll move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 13, which is the work programme. Thank you to all members of the substitutes engaged in our work programme workshop in June. This is a write-up, and it goes from page realistically from page 47, and I hand over briefly to Sarah.
It's just as written on the front cover sheet that this is a write-up of your workshop, notes taken during then and resources used, but it's for the committee to comment, question, change and ultimately approve today. Thank you.
Hannah?
Thanks, Claire. So just looking at this, I appreciate we've only got 10 minutes till the mayor turns up. So looking on pages 52 and 53, that's essentially the draft work plan that Sarah's put together for us as a result of that session that we had, which looks good to me. I love the fact that bus reform is top of the list, because that's something that's been ongoing. I guess the thing for me, just in terms of what we've just been, you know, sort of talking about for the last 20 minutes or so, is I do just have a feeling that stuff is going to start coming down the pipeline to the Combined Mayoral Authority, you know, really quite quickly. I mean, it's a hope, to be honest, maybe rather than a feeling. Maybe in 12 months' time nothing will have happened, but I think we just need to be mindful that if things go as we all want them to, more stuff is going to start coming into the MTA's pipeline, and we just need to make sure that we've got, I guess, another box there under beds for babies to just keep a close eye on anything that emergent devolution issues. Exactly, Steve, that'll do.
Any further questions on that? Because I have asked about bus services in particular as we move forward, and that's coming onto the work programme. That's coming to the next committee, I believe, and we're going to have a briefing in August.
So we're looking at the request was around getting information to the committee on the bus consultations, service changes, how that's being communicated to the public. I've sought that from officers and will relay before the next committee meeting, and I guess it's for committee to feed in if it's enough, if they want more, and we'll put that in place.
Jane?
I don't know if it's technically on the work programme, but we were talking about seeing the portfolio holders more often. Just as a suggestion, I mean, the briefings that we've been having between meetings online have been brilliant, and it's nice to have a bit of time to sort of get information. Maybe we could squash the first bit of this agenda and have a bigger section for the mayor and maybe a portfolio holder, because they should know what's coming down the line.
Would the committee think that we should, because there are 4 other, because the constituent with the portfolio holders, whether we should have one of those on as part of the programme of meetings each year, or how I'm open to suggestions. Any alternative viewpoints on, we bring them in and ask them what their plans are for the what they're doing at the moment, what their plans are for the future year, because that will all be tied in with the future devolution. I don't know whether we should try and rotate the portfolio holders into our meeting to have a question session on them with particular to their brief.
I think you'd have to accept attendance by teams if that's okay, because it's obviously the leaders. It's half a day out of their diary to come here and then.
Any alternative suggestions of that? No. That's it. I think that should work.
You're suggesting doing it by teams, but once a year they can't come. I just, to be honest, even my leader, I would expect them to, if they take a role on and a responsibility on, they should at least once a year be able to come in, and that can be programmed in round their diary. I mean, we are there to scrutinise them. What happens if teams goes down then? I mean, things like, I'm not being funny, but once we say to bring him in once a year. There's 4 leaders. I'll be honest, I think if we are going to bring him in, we should bring him in personally. That's my own personal view. I know Sir Steve's all of it.
I think when we talked about we don't have enough meetings, potentially that could be 1 meeting a year, and that could be added to what we've already got. And then all programmes then are delivered in one go instead of piecemeal. Does that sound like common sense?
I think there is another issue there, which if you spread them out on your existing meetings, you won't get to hear the plans for one of the portfolios till almost the end of the year, if you see what I mean. So I think I'm saying I agree to an extent. I think whether we can achieve that or not, we can. But I think Sarah can work with the mayor, the mayor's office, and the leaders to try and work out the best way of doing that. Because, like I say, because if you leave it one portfolio at a time, and you want about the years ahead plans, well, by the 3rd meeting, you've 2/3 of the way through the year, aren't you? So.
Just on that, if it's set out through the meeting times, it don't mean to say that all portfolio holders have got to be there for full session. So it's only a portion of their day, and then come at a slot, come do what they need to do, and then
there is also the option as opposed to a formal meeting about whether we do an informal, like we have done on other things, for briefing on the portfolio. Just something to think about again, which may be an easier way of arranging that. So
I think Brian makes a fair point. Asking these very important people to to give us an hour once a year is perhaps not an unreasonable ask. Obviously with adequate diary time. I mean, I guess the other thing is they all get together how many times a year for MCA board?
They meet formally 6 and informally 6.
So that's something that's already in their diaries where where they all get together. So we could perhaps metaphorically clobber them after one of those meetings.
Sarah will take a task to.
There is the potential to synergise that to make it much more fluid if they've had a meeting potentially.
Thanks, Chair. I just wondered as well, are there any further opportunities to perhaps invite them along should a relevant agenda item under their portfolio come along?
When I was saying one formal meeting a year, I wasn't excluding the possibility that they would necessarily come in for other meetings or be asked to that way. That's the top level of our ambition to be able to query them. but it was the fact that a formal meeting a year, a session where we could go over what they are doing with their portfolio and the questions regarding the portfolio.
Again, scrutiny is not about just scrutinising the individual, it's actually scrutinising their portfolio and their work, what they're doing. I don't have a problem with that. And I think we should see them once a year. That's my own personal view, to scrutinise them. I don't have a problem with that. And if we need to see them on additional things, we pull them in on screen, like we pull officers in on screen if they're busy, just for an half an hour, if that's what we need to pull them in on a work on a specific project, what they're doing. I ain't got a problem with that as well. I'm not saying to them, tie them down here all the time. I see enough of my lead. I don't need to see him anymore. So, I mean, it's about making that communication. It's communicating with them at all times and making sure that they are aware of it. And scrutiny's got an issue, and scrutiny's involved in the Mayoral Combined Authority, and they are aware of that, and they have to attend when needed. And that's the issue. Scrutiny can pull them in when needed. But it's about working with them, innit? You get more out of somebody, not by just saying, oh, let's just pull them in for the sake of pulling them in. You get more out of somebody if you try to work with them and work with them on the programme, what they're actually delivering.
Don't forget concept of critical frame, Brian.
So
Right.
if Sarah takes that away and then comes back with a proposal between the next couple of weeks, does that sound?
Laura?
Excuse my naivety being new, and I won't be able to use this for very much.
It's always evolved. I think the titles that I've taken from the session did try to get at sort of strategic aims. Again, it's for this committee to take forward a topic like, bus reform, and look at it through a strategic lens in how they do the work. Take on board.
With
yeah.
bus, the bus franchising and how it's developing, we've had several bites of the cherry of that as it's developed in the emerging plans, and I presume it's going to carry on that way, because we've got lots to keep looking at how it develops, because we've only been, it's developed from a outline plan to what they think the routes they might go down, and hopefully it'll be moving forward from there. So that's the sort of thing. And also things like the skills community education, as you've talked about, that'll be an ongoing body of work, as will some of the other some of the other stuff along with active travel. And I presume with Doncaster Airport will be one of the things is how, as it develops, that we'll want to keep asking questions about the business case and things, how they move forward. So it's some things will be more one-offs, and other things will be ongoing bodies of work.
Just not the community skills, but the employment and skills strategy is something that's really, we talk about what's important to the communities, but employment and skills strategy is absolutely vital if we're going to achieve growth and tackle deprivation. So that's something I'm really keen on making sure we have a focus on.
We've got Hannah, and then I've got Josh.
I think Laura makes a really good point, actually. I think because I was on the committee for last year as well, Laura, and I think we've kept the work stream quite tight, because the projects have sort of been the projects, really, and there's been no potential of really any other projects occurring. It's just been what it has, and the big thing has been bus reform, a lot of stuff about active travel, around the emergent devolution priority stuff that's coming down the line. That perhaps does give us the opportunity to be a little more esoteric and have something like health or planning reform, on our agenda, because there is now the potential of the MCA actually getting, specific work plans around that. I think we've sort of resisted the temptation to you know, because we are tight on time, we've tried to stick really clearly to the projects that have actually been happening. But yeah, that's perhaps another way to look at it rather than, yeah, keep it more broad.
Josh?
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking at, of course, it's not within this committee's remit to look at PCC functions, and I wouldn't expect any agenda item as such to come here. But clearly, we're still able to keep an open mind about questioning the Mayor on perhaps some things that fall under PCC, because clearly they will have some relevance as well to other MCA functions, etc. You know, such as growth. You know, questioning him on crime, which might link into growth, etc.
There's always opportunity. The whole point about the mayoral questions, I can't see him at the moment. So it's deliberately left open to be able to ask questions of relevance to the mayor and what he's doing at the time. So, right. So I've got these words here, which are: can I confirm then that the committee approved the work programme? But obviously, I would hope that we can interact with each other to put things on, because I hope that this committee can move and, you know, as you say, the critical friend, and to make sure as things come up, and they're likely to come up thick and fast over the next this particular year with a change of government, etc. And obviously the second part of that is commit to engage with future scoping requirements alongside the MCA executive team to refine and plan for delivery of the work programme. Okay. Shall we have a short break while we wait for the mayor to appear? I'll be back online. Welcome back to anybody who's watching us, and welcome to Mayor Oliver Coppard. Thank you for being here. We have seen your plan for South Yorkshire, and can we move on to questions, please? Jane.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. One relates to the pledge: develop an ambitious cancer strategy for South Yorkshire, helping people to find the disease sooner, saving as many families as possible from the devastating impact of cancer. How do you think you can influence at the moment, and how do you think you're going to be influenced in the future, the speed that people actually get into the cancer care pathway, given that the very first step of getting a GP appointment is so difficult for people?
Sorry, out of practice. It's probably worth me saying one of the reasons why I put that in there was because over the course of the last few years had briefings from various different cancer charities, Yorkshire Cancer, and amongst others. My sister had cancer, got kidney cancer at the age of 27, and you know, I remember vividly the care she got. This was in 2006, which is fundamentally different now, I think, to the experience that most people face when they are diagnosed or might be diagnosed with cancer. And you're absolutely right that one of the chief challenges there is that sort of primary care route into the cancer pathway is takes all too long. We've got a colleague here, obviously I won't say who, but whose partner has been diagnosed with cancer, and the wait between, for instance, the scan and the results has been interminable, and it just isn't okay. So partly the way in which we can influence that is through the ICP, and as chair of the ICP, clearly I have a formal responsibility there. Partly that's through using more of, I would say, my convening power with colleagues and partners across the system to make sure that we are diagnosing cancer more swiftly, potentially not just through GP appointments and primary care routes. So there are other ways of doing that we can explore and work with partners. There are examples elsewhere, for instance, lung cancer being diagnosed in other ways, bowel cancer, and other forms of cancer besides. So there are different ways of potentially diagnosing cancer, and we should be exploring those. I've also talked at length with partners. We convened a roundtable a few months ago looking at the mechanism for using data to better target and identify certain communities that we would more proactively engage to get them engaged in the cancer pathway. And so there are a bunch of different opportunities there that I think we should be and could be looking at. But first and foremost, the reason for that is because the cancer statistics in South Yorkshire are shocking. So we have worse cancer outcomes than on some of those cancers than almost anywhere else in the country, and it just isn't okay. And that's essentially a postcode lottery, and it's a lottery that we're losing at. And there's a wide range of reasons why that is the case, as your question points to. But we should look at that in the round and try and find some solutions. And so what I'm trying to do is bring some energy, some attention, some focus. I have the hard power in that space, some formal power, and I also have soft power in that space as well. And now, hopefully, with a Labour government, I have the opportunity to work with the Health Secretary and his team in order to be able to, I would hope, bring in more support in that space as well.
Thank you very much for that. Next question is actually about build on our Working Win programme and Barnsley's Council's Thought Leading Pathways to Work Commission. How do you think you might be able to influence small, medium enterprises to actually take on disabled people with long-term health conditions? Because again, it's a little bit similar that we can support people at the beginning through the sort of confidence building, CV writing, but in the end you've got to get businesses be able to give people opportunities to work placements, actually work. Mentioned Grimm & Co actually earlier, they're fantastic. I know they've taken people on.
Well, we should say the Pathways to Work Commission was launched in Barnsley just the other day. Alan Milburn, I was commissioner on there. Alan Milburn was the chair. Torsten Bell and others were on that commission. We launched that in Barnsley on Tuesday with Liz Kendall, the Secretary of State for DWP. And then we were down in London yesterday launching that in Parliament as well. And that is a groundbreaking piece of work which particularly looks at economic inactivity and how we might support people back into work who are economically inactive but want to be back in work. And one of the problems that those people face is the number of providers who support those people back into work. And in Barnsley alone, there are 70 providers at least who work with those people, which is obviously quite a confusing landscape and quite a difficult landscape to navigate if you're not particularly au fait with some of those systems. And to be fair, most people aren't. So we first and foremost have to look at that in terms of the people that are in that place and how we'd help them. And that's the priority of the Pathways to Work Commission. But after the Pathways to Work Commission launch, we then had a roundtable with some of the both employer and employer organisations and business representatives from across Barnsley and South Yorkshire. And one of them, Carrie Sudbury from Barnsley Chamber of Commerce, actually raised that very question. She said, look, one of the big challenges is that small businesses often get these kind of schemes foisted upon them, and they find it quite difficult because if you're a multinational business, a PwC or an ASOS, for instance, you can cope with those big schemes, but if you're a small business, you can't. And I think absolutely that is a valid question that we need to learn how to answer as we go through this process. But the point is that the Pathways to Work Commission is first of all and foremost going to have to be a pilot. And we need to get some money from the government in order to run that pilot. But the pilot is the opportunity to learn those lessons and work out how to do it. But we will be working with people like Carrie, with businesses from across not just Barnsley, but the whole of South Yorkshire in order to work out how to do that. And it won't be done without thinking about that, thinking about the question. I'm probably not the best person to explain in detail how we do it, but I can say we will do that in a way that incorporates the learning, the thinking, and the experiences of small to medium-sized businesses, because they are fundamental. 90% of our businesses in South Yorkshire are small to medium-sized businesses, so it can't happen without those small businesses, and we need to work with them.
Thank you. I'd really like a progress on those. That's really interesting, the answers, and I'd like to hear a bit more next time round. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Josh, next.
Thanks, Chair. So under Pledge 2 of your manifesto, see it says that you're talking about using the money confiscated from criminals and community payback schemes to clean up the streets. Sort of, how much do you expect this to raise? How many streets will you be looking at doing?
Specifically, how many streets?
But I do really like the general pledge, though.
Thank you. So it changes, obviously, because depending on how much, you can't legislate for how much money may or may not be confiscated from criminals, sadly. So we don't quite know, but somewhere in the ballpark of £1 million is not an unreasonable type of figure to think it may be. And so kind of with that amount of money, it would be possible to hire, to get into contract with a team in order to be able to go across South Yorkshire and clean up some of the most egregious examples of both graffiti and fly tipping. They're the two that I'm kind of particularly concerned about. I do think, not that I fully subscribe to kind of broken window theory, but I do think there is something about pride in place and being able to kind of address some of those challenges. We see all too much graffiti, frankly. I hate graffiti, cannot stand graffiti. Street art's different, but graffiti I just can't stand. And fly tipping as well. And we have beautiful countryside, and all too much of it is marred by fly tipping. So it is partly about how can we fund those sorts of projects, because as you will know, kind of local government finance is not in such a place that we can just fund any number of people to be out and about, kind of cleaning up the streets and cleaning up graffiti. So we need to find a different way to fund it, which is what that is about. So I can't give you an answer. I can come back to you about kind of specifically how many streets that might be, depending on how much money we have and what that might look like and what might be possible. So if you're happy, we can write to you, or we can come back to that at a later session, whatever you prefer. But more broadly, I think, as you, I hope, agree, the focus is the right one, but it can't just be about using that money and that's the only way we solve that problem. It also has to be about community-based schemes, working with charities as well and third sector organisations to kind of get in before those problems become real. So engaging in the question of why do people do graffiti and kind of engaging earlier in the system, but also then working with the police to clamp down on some of that and make sure that they are taking that seriously, because for me it's a big quality of life issue. And one of the problems that we've had, I think, through policing over the last number of years is that as the police resources have shrunk, the police have quite rightly and obviously had to focus more and more on just things like dangerous crime, so violence and other sort of serious crimes. And that's absolutely right, of course. You want the police to focus on the most important issues, but I would like the police over time, hopefully as we get more resources, to be able to also focus on quality of life issues as well, because I think those quality of life issues are hugely important.
Thanks. Yeah, I personally do subscribe to the broken window effect, actually.
I want to believe it, but I also know there's some evidence that shows, there's contrary views.
So if I could move on, your manifesto also mentioned testing and trialling free travel on public transport for young people in South Yorkshire. So what will be the age cap then? How will that be decided? Has it been decided already?
No.
And the trials, when will they take place?
So for those that maybe haven't seen that particular bit, so I have said we want to run a trial of free travel for young people. Now the reason it was phrased in the way that it was phrased was because I didn't want to commit to saying, right, under 18s, everybody under 18s, or 16 to 18 or 11 to 18. There's a number of good arguments for each of those different groups, but they come with different price tags, as you would imagine. Now, part of that is about having a conversation with the bus companies, because right now we're not in a position where we can say we will run that without funding it directly. It's a bit different when you're in a place where, if you're in a place where...
Well, what are your thoughts on the recent increase then? There was the change in young people's fares just last weekend we got notified about. How does that sit with that pledge?
Oh, well, I think it makes it all the more important, that pledge, because it was regrettable that they chose to raise child fares. The way it was communicated was not particularly effective, I thought, either. We didn't find out till quite late in the day that was going to happen. I don't think that's a responsible way to behave, if I'm honest. I have a good relationship with First. I think First are usually progressive in the way that they approach some of these challenges and problems. It's entirely reasonable for bus companies over time to raise their fares. I understand that entirely. Of course it is. The costs have gone up. They want to pay their bus drivers fairly. Obviously, kind of costs for things like electric buses, things like fuel have gone up, and that isn't therefore entirely reasonable. But I think there is a better way of communicating that, and they should be talking to people like us about that in the longer term, about how to do those fare strategies, and that didn't take place. So I'm disappointed in that approach. But it makes, I think, the potential young person's travel trial even more important. My ambition is to be as expansive with that as possible. Because I think one of the ways in which we create a more sustainable bus market is by getting more young people, and you probably know this better than me, but getting more young people onto buses at an earlier age and then keeping on the bus, because as soon as you hit 17 in South Yorkshire, you kind of want to get a car, because frankly it's much easier to get a car than it is to get on the bus or get on the tram. So we want to find a way to keep people using the bus and get into that lifestyle habit of using the bus as much as possible. I also want to make sure that it's a help for families, so if you're kind of taking your kids on the bus, I want to be able to help you to do that, because potentially if you're a paying customer and you take kids on the bus, that helps everybody. So there's all sorts of different considerations, and that's the challenge that we're working through right now. So there's no immediate timetable. I'd like to do it as quickly as possible, but there's no immediate timetable, because I want to have that conversation with partners, not least our councils clearly, but also then obviously the bus companies and other stakeholders besides, young people particularly, and then go from there. And then probably, don't hold me to this please, but probably start with a smaller group and then expand it, rather than start with a bigger group and then contract it is, as you will understand, probably a smarter way, both politically and practically, to try and solve that problem.
Okay, Laura, then Hannah.
Thanks. I've got a couple of points. I'll get rid of the really simple one first, which is that will you remove discrimination against older people in franchising? Because currently the older person's bus pass, which includes me, ends at 11 p.m. So people going to events in city centres, cultural activities, etc., are having to get taxis. I understand the 9:30 in the morning because of people needing to get to work, but 11 o'clock being told you can't get on that bus unless you pay the full fare seems to me discriminatory.
You're like my mum, you want to go out raving after.
Of course I do. We're not totally past it when we get to 67.
Look, I'd like to look at all of that as part of the franchising process. I can't make any promises, I'm afraid, partly because Gareth sat right there and he'll throw something at me, but largely because it just wouldn't be fair.
Sean Ed raised it with me,
and
which
it's
is after you.
I can imagine, but like, it's an absolutely valid question, and it's one that we need to get into, but I can't give you an answer that would be accurate right now, because we're not at that place in the negotiation, in the discussion. And we, first and foremost, and this is the problem that we faced in South Yorkshire, as everyone around this table will know, is the funding and viability of the bus network under the current system. Now, obviously, I think we are in a better place if we do take on that bus reform challenge and we do franchise the buses, and I think you all know where I stand on that, although legally I can't say which way we will go clearly, but actually kind of that gives you the opportunity to get into those conversations. So I'm really happy to have that conversation at the appropriate moment, because we should be talking about those things, as we should be talking about free travel for young people and how we can be as expansive in that approach as we possibly can. Some people have to pay for the bus though, otherwise none of this system works.
Okay, my second more serious point, you could argue, is you've got to develop a single point of entries for skills and training opportunities in South Yorkshire. It's very light on employment. Not everything is about skills. Some of it is about tackling worklessness and complex challenges that some people in our more deprived communities face. And I'm really worried that you're talking about regional commissioning for that work, when clearly delivery should be at a hyper-local level. And within our local authority, within our cities, towns and cities, we do have VCS infrastructure, which could be at risk if, say, one provider was commissioned, such as Reed, which would then parachute in on the back of those organisations, not provide full cost recovery, and effectively just cream off the profits. That's been raised with me by the VCS.
Okay, sorry, in which case I seem to have unintentionally set hairs running that I didn't mean to. That's not what that means. So what that means, that commitment, is essentially, it's based on like personal experiences, sort of good friends of mine, and seeing some of this work at, you know, organisational level, etc., etc. Basically, the system is hugely complex. Let's talk about the Pathways to Work Commission in Barnsley. That's an example, I think, in the work support space, but it's similarly in the skill space, where a lot of people who are experiencing either worklessness or maybe don't have the skills, base fundamental skills in particular, are then asked to navigate what are hugely complicated landscapes when it comes to the support mechanisms that are available, and they're asked to kind of navigate them often, certainly at first, by themselves. And I think that is just this sort of like really strange way around, like you can only access the support the further in you go, and the more skills you have, the more support you can access. It's sort of completely like the wrong way around. What I'm saying about the skills system is you just got to streamline the front door. So the actual system that supports on the back end is always going to be, to a certain extent, complex, and there's going to be different partners, VCSE and others, in that space, and that's absolutely right, because different people will need different things in different places, and the local nature of that is really important as well. But the front door bit of that, how you get into that system first and foremost, has to be as simple as humanly possible, because if you are in that place, and often people in that place don't always have maybe the motivation to kind of get involved. It's quite easy, isn't it? We've all been in this place, I imagine, where kind of lose a little bit of hope, and then you kind of lose a bit of motivation, and then before you know it, you kind of spiral. Actually kind of making that as easy as possible for people to access that front door, to get that first bit of support, that first step on the ladder, and give you a bit of a momentum into the rest of the system to be able to help you to navigate that, feels like it needs to be streamlined. And that's what the colleges say to me. I've spoken to the colleges about some of this. They want to do that as well. So I think that first bit of the system is what I'm talking about in that pledge. Not saying, look, we're just going to have one provider who's going to do every single thing across South Yorkshire and everybody else can go whistle. That's absolutely not the case.
I'm
That's
talking
not
about
my point.
commissioning, and they have been told by your authority, the VCES sector, that commissioning for employment and skills will be done regionally and will not be devolved to local authorities to work with existing voluntary community sector in their area.
Well,
so I think there is a huge, it needs clarifying, Oliver, because there's a lot of pressure building up about this out
So
there.
there's a slight difference there, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's what I'm committing to in terms of the pledge that I have made in the manifesto, and then there's the operational decisions being taken by this organisation. And whilst obviously I'm responsible for all of those things, the answer that I gave you is in response to the pledge that I made.
Yeah.
In terms of the operational work that we are doing within this organisation, I'm happy to write to you and give you a full kind of breakdown of what that means, and we'll get one of the skills team to kind of write you a proper brief. That said, I am sure in my own mind, so just so you know where I am standing on this issue, I am sure that absolutely local organisations will always have a role in skills delivery and the provision of services across South Yorkshire. How it is commissioned is maybe a slightly different question, but we always have to make sure that decisions are taken closest to the communities that they affect, and that we are absolutely working with those partners on the ground who know best how to deliver some of those services. And so there's going to be a balance, of course there is, but let's have that conversation about if you think that balance is right once we write to you with the detail.
I think we might have to have a look at work there, because I'm not sure that the two, what you're saying and what the actual
Different
reality
things.
is different things. Anyway, Hannah.
Hi Oliver, welcome back and congratulations. Rather than asking about specific pledges, I'm going to ask more generally. Obviously, you know, this was a political document, so we have a manifesto written for re-election, and lots of pledges here, 30 of them, some of which, you know, are clearly relating to work that you've been doing over the last 2 years, and some, you know, perhaps a bit more aspirational, if you like.
Yes.
So, are we going to see all of these pledges perhaps put into, you know, into some sort of work plan with timescales? Obviously, you know, we absolutely don't expect you to, you know, achieve all 30 of these within the first month. You know, as Mick says, maybe the first 2 months, but it would be, I think it would be really helpful for us as a scrutiny committee to get an idea of, what's coming up fast, what's sort of more long term, because at the minute they're political pledges. It would be really lovely to see them turned into smarter goals.
It's a really fair question.
I guess.
So we've got my colleague Claire Monaghan on the call, and she was joining particularly actually to talk about the process. Do you mind if I just Claire? I'm happy to add kind of the political dimension.
Yes.
She's spoken, but sorry, I didn't do that with my microphone on, so she won't have heard any of that. Claire, we were just saying, you're obviously on the call, and Hannah's question, Councillor Kitchen's question, was particularly about process. So would you mind just talking a little bit about process and in terms of how we're going to operationalise the manifesto commitments, please?
Yep, Brill, thank you. I couldn't hear anything that you said. We are just at the moment working through the 30 things that are in there, but also the work streams that we need to continue from prior to the election. So things like the skills strategy that colleagues have been talking about, the plan for growth, work around the investment zone, bus franchising. So what we're just working at the moment is to say, right, okay, let's put everything together and see what the full kind of picture looks like, because as well as the things that are in Oliver's manifesto, we've got statutory responsibilities to deliver as well. So the team here are at the moment working through and saying, okay, let's allocate resources against these. What order would we recommend that we take things forward in? And then the next step after that will be to take that back to Oliver and the leaders to say, we think the prioritisation might look a little bit like this. What do you think? We'll get their feedback. Oliver's been feeding in a bit to that already. We'll get that feedback from them, and then we will be able to bring, hopefully, to a meeting in the autumn, a scoped out work plan.
Thank you, Claire. Can I just add to that? If I can just be completely frank with you, because I think we're all grown-ups, right? Like, part of the point of the manifesto, you'll understand, like, this organisation has limited resources, of course it does, and as Claire says, you know, we have statutory responsibilities and they have to come first, of course. And so they have to take priority, and then, you know, clearly I have an opportunity to try and shape some of the other work streams and things that we do, and make sure that they align, obviously, with my priorities and what I've said I want to do. But I am the mayor of a combined authority, and therefore have to work in partnership with our local authority partners. And to a certain extent, you know, obviously I talked to them, we kind of had this conversation before the election, but clearly now there is an opportunity to drive this forward. But some of the point of the manifesto is a statement of intent to try and bring the system along with me, and to get the government also into that place as well. And, you know, at the time, obviously, it was written, there was a Tory government, now we've obviously got a Labour government, and it's in this, exactly the same place of having to get the support of the government to do some of these things. Some of this stuff we can do. We can absolutely do in South Yorkshire if we focus our attention. Some of this stuff we're going to need some support from government if we're going to do it in the sort of expansive way that I want to do it. And this isn't like the manifesto that you're right if you're the government, because if you're the government, you essentially make the weather, right? And you can decide to do all of these things unilaterally. And sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, but you at least have the opportunity to do that. With the manifesto that I've pulled together, and I think, you know, I think it's fair to say, this is the statement of intent. I absolutely am committed to delivering all of it. But some of it I'm going to need to get some support from government in to do, and I've got to, you know, I will be honest about that. Clearly you will ask me about that, and we've got to have that conversation going forward. But this is a statement of intent, and I want to deliver as much as possible. Some of it we can do, some of it we're going to need to work.
Yeah, that's totally fine, and I guess that's why it would be nice to see it in that sort of work plan form, and because some of the things, you know, you talked about sort of, you know, fly tipping and graffiti cleaning in response to Josh's question. I suspect our local authorities would like to just have some of that cash to, you know, get their... Barnsley's got a brilliant graffiti cleaning team. They spend a lot of time cleaning up graffiti. They would love to be slightly better resourced. So linked to that, obviously you've, I'm guessing your sort of workload has rather taken an uptick for a couple of reasons. Number one, because you've taken on the Police and Crime Commissioner duties, but also because I suppose you've perhaps gone from being a little bit of a politician of protest, if you like, Oliver. It's less time consuming to say, I'm really sorry we can't do that because of the Tories, than it is to actually have to crack on and do some of the stuff because you are being facilitated to do that. So just a question really about how are you finding that transition to all of a sudden pushing on, I'm hoping, more open doors than you have been doing recently. You know, how are you managing that in terms of your own workload, you know, the workload of the rest of the team? The thing we've been discussing today in the meeting is the optimism, I suppose. It feels like things are going to start coming down onto your plate really quite fast. That might not come to fruition, but that's definitely the mood music that we're getting, is that you're going to get more and more. How are you managing that? And very much linked to that, how is the appointment of your deputy mayor going so that you can get that PCC thing off your plate on a day-to-day basis?
Thank you. A really good question. I mean, look, you'd expect, I love my job, right? And I feel very lucky to have been re-elected, and the expanded role, I think, is a massive opportunity to try and tie, as you know, we tie up some of those services and make sure things work better together. In terms of workload, obviously, the staff of the OPCC have come into this organisation, so they do the majority of the work, frankly. They're the ones that are actually doing that, and they're a great team, and they're now integrated into this organisation, and that seems to be going, I think, really well. That will be completed, we think, by some of the IT stuff and things like that will be completed by kind of autumn time, we think. And they're obviously now starting to kind of work on the police and crime plan and how we deliver that police and crime plan in good order and in good time. It has to be done legally within the first year of my office, so by next May, and I would like to do it a bit sooner than that, but I'm actually relatively relaxed about the timetable. I'd rather get it right than do it quickly. It's a perfectly good police and crime plan that we have right now, but it obviously kind of needs to reflect my priorities and the ones that were laid out in the manifesto, but we'll get that right over time. I'm spending kind of my time, as you would imagine, kind of immersing myself in the detail of some of that and making sure that I'm on top of it. I've been on a number of visits. I went to see the call centre staff the other day, which is a fascinating experience to see just how well they do that. Had a briefing from the CSE team just the other day. You know, there's a bunch of things that I'm really keen to kind of get on top of and learn about. And so, look, I won't, you know, clearly it's an expanded role, and I'm kind of probably working longer hours now than I did before. It's, you know, a tough job, but I love it, so it's easier when you love you doing your job, right? So so it's great. In terms of my engagement with the government, and I think you're right to say, you know, hopefully the stature and status and responsibilities of this office increase, and that puts pressure on all of us, frankly, and I think me most of all, but all of us, to kind of get that right. I've said for a long time now, I don't just want attention, I want responsibility. Because look, mayors are great and it's important that we get devolution, but I would argue kind of over the last number of years, quite honestly, we've had quite a lot of lip service paid to mayors, but I'm not sure that the rhetoric has always matched the reality. And I think what we're seeing now is a shift towards actually that changing. And so, look, I'm really grateful for the new government's kind of attention that they put on mayors. I was on a call this morning with Johnny Reynolds, Secretary of State for Business. All of the mayors were there. Ben Houcher was there. We were engaged in non-political conversations just about kind of what we need to do together in order to deliver. So far, I've met with, we had obviously had Liz here in Barnsley just the other day. I'm seeing Louise on Friday. Was talking to Bridget Phillipson the other day. I was in number 10 yesterday. Met with Keir on the phone because I was ill with COVID last week. Met with Rachel on the phone. Like, I've had more engagement in the last 2 weeks than the last 2 years. Now that's got to turn into something, you know, meetings are great, but like give us the power and also give us the funding to match. We've got a huge capacity issue in this organisation, and it's all well and good government giving us responsibility. They need to give us the resources and the capacity and the capability to deliver against those. So look, watch this space. Ultimately, I will say to you, and I've said this on the campaign trail, you would have heard me say it, but like, I will treat this government in the same way, that if they don't give South Yorkshire what we want, what we need, I will say that. Because ultimately that's my job as the Mayor of South Yorkshire. I represent the whole of South Yorkshire and I'll continue to do that. I do think that we are seeing a different tone and a different approach, so I'm hopeful that I don't need to sort of call out the government every 5 minutes, but like, I really want to be in a place where we're working in partnership, and I think that sort of mature politics is what mayors can potentially, hopefully, do a bit differently, because we don't have that same oppositional approach, I hope.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm just going to...
Oh, right, okay, sorry, thank you. Yeah.
Brian.
Thanks for that, Oliver. I've been around a long time. So what's your views on scrutiny and pre-scrutiny? Because they're slightly different, and that one helps the other out. But my view is pre-scrutiny works, and it's good, but it's got to have the commitment of all parties and the trust between all parties.
I mean, I've said this to Councillor Huggan, but I've said this in this forum, like from the outset. I think back to the point around not just attention but responsibility. One of the ways in which we make this system more robust and we get more attention, more responsibility for mayors, and we get more powers and more capacity and more funding, is by frankly being much more open to the idea of scrutiny and accountability and transparency. Because if we want that trust and faith from government, if we want the public to have trust and faith in the decisions that we take in this building, that I take, then I need them to see that those decisions are being taken in the public interest and they're being taken in the right way. And I've always said that from the beginning. I don't think that the scrutiny and accountability of mayors is enough. I don't think it's robust enough, personally. I think that the press, for instance, aren't well funded enough in this country. Local press in particular is going through a torrid time. You know, the idea that the Sheffield Star, the Barnsley Chronicle, the Doncaster Free Press have the resources to properly look at some of the big decisions that not just we're taking, but they're taking at a local, regional level more broadly. Just it isn't there, and I wish it was, and I think we all need to worry about that a little bit. Like, and I will kind of help in whatever way I can to make us as accountable as possible, be that pre-scrutiny, scrutiny, whatever you want to kind of, whichever way we can do that. But I fundamentally think it's important that we are as accountable as possible to our communities, because that is the way in which we increase confidence in politics, and certainly we increase confidence in a new bit of the political system, which is mayors and devolution.
So coming on that then, what about your portfolio holders? Do you believe they should be scrutinised in the same manner as you're scrutinised, as they're doing work on your behalf?
Well, I think they are scrutinised in the sense that each of you will hold to account your leaders, and so they are scrutinised in place, absolutely. Now, look, I am happy to have a conversation about how we can do that, and if members want to come here, if you want to have Steve Houghton here and Ross here, or Tom here, or Chris, like, I'm happy to have that conversation. Obviously, I can't speak on their behalf in that sense, but like, I'm really happy to have that conversation about how we could approach that going forward. Like I say, I think they are already scrutinised in place, and I think, you know, I'm open to a conversation if you want to tell me that you don't think you can do that effectively in your own local authorities. But I do think, like, for instance, particularly in Sheffield, you know, you've got no overall control, and so therefore kind of it's a bit of a different system in Sheffield. But broadly speaking, I am open to the idea of better or different scrutiny measures or accountability measures. So if you want to have that conversation, if Councillor Huggan wants to have that conversation with me, I'm more than happy to.
Yeah, we've already sort of had an earlier discussion about this, because one of the things we've talked about is, because obviously we can all hold our council leaders to account. The problem is, you know, they have portfolios under Simca, and therefore it sort of seems to it falls between the cracks there, because we're not questioning them about what their portfolios are. So that is something we need to develop.
Sorry, I think it's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. Okay,
see no more questions, and we're actually out of time. We've had 30 minutes on this. Thank you very much, Oliver. Thank you for coming along. Look forward to seeing you at the next meeting of the Scrutiny Committee, and we will. We have started to develop a work programme, and obviously as things develop from the new government, new announcements come over, then obviously it's going to be a fast-moving, fast-changing situation, I hope, over the next few months.
Thank you.
Thank you very
and
much.
whilst you're on your way out, don't fail to admire the new art that we've got on the walls, which I'm very proud of in the corridor outside. Thank you, everybody.